The rifle range at dawn was eerily quiet, with only the sound of Sarah's boots crunching on gravel as she walked toward the shooting stations. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson was already there, along with 3 certified military marksmanship instructors, who would serve as official witnesses. Sarah noticed several other figures standing in the distance. Word had indeed gotten around about her attempt. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the head instructor, approached Sarah with a clipboard and a stern expression. He was a weathered veteran with over 20 years of experience training military snipers. His reputation for being tough but fair was well known throughout the base. "Martinez, before we begin, I need to explain exactly what you're up against," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in the military. 15 shots, 15 different scenarios. You'll start at 100 yards and work your way out to 800 yards. Wind conditions, lighting, and target sizes will vary. Each shot must be perfect center mass. Even if your bullet touches the edge of the center ring, it's considered a miss and you start over. Sarah nodded, checking her rifle one final time. She had chosen her father's old Marine-issued M40A3, a weapon she had trained with since she was 12 years old. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, familiar and comforting in her hands. The first shot was at 100 yards, prone position, no wind, perfect lighting. This was the easiest shot of the 15, but Sarah knew that overconfidence could ruin everything. She settled into position, controlled her breathing, and found her target through the scope. The black center of the bullseye seemed to call to her. She squeezed the trigger slowly, following through completely. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed across the range. Through her scope, she could see the bullet hole perfectly centered in the target. The first instructor raised a green flag, signaling a perfect hit. Shot 2 was at 150 yards, this time from a standing position with a slight crosswind. Sarah adjusted her stance, compensated for the wind, and fired. Another perfect center hit. The small group of observers began to murmur among themselves. By the 5th shot, more people had gathered to watch. Sarah noticed some Navy SEALs had arrived, their presence both intimidating and motivating. She recognized one of them as Chief Petty Officer Michael Hawk Harrison, a legendary sniper whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. He stood with his arms crossed, watching her every move with intense scrutiny. The 6th shot presented the first real challenge. The target was at 300 yards, positioned behind a partial obstruction that left only a small window for the shot. Sarah had to adjust her position twice to find the right angle. The wind had picked up slightly, and she could feel the pressure of everyone watching her. She settled into her shooting position, steadied her breathing, and found her target. The shot felt perfect as it left the barrel. Through the scope, she could see another dead center hit. 6 down, 9 to go. As the morning progressed, the shots became increasingly difficult. Shot 8 was at 400 yards in variable wind conditions that changed direction every few seconds. Sarah had to wait for the perfect moment when the wind settled. She lay motionless for almost 3 minutes, watching the grass and flags, waiting for her opportunity. When the wind finally calmed, she took the shot. Perfect center. The 9th shot presented a new challenge altogether. The target was at 500 yards, but the twist was that Sarah had to fire from an awkward position, lying on her side with the rifle supported only by a small bipod. This simulated the kind of difficult shooting position that Special Operations Forces might encounter in real combat situations. Sarah had practiced this position hundreds of times, but never under this kind of pressure. She could feel sweat despite the cool morning air, and her heart rate was elevated from the intensity of the situation. She forced herself to focus on her breathing, using the meditation techniques her father had taught her years ago. The shot rang out across the range, another perfect hit. By shot 10, the crowd had grown considerably. Word had spread throughout the base, and sailors from various units had come to witness what many were calling an impossible attempt. Sarah tried to block out the noise and focus on her task, but she could feel the weight of their expectations and doubts pressing down on her. Shot 10 was at 600 yards, and for the first time, Sarah felt a moment of doubt creep into her mind. The target looked impossibly small through her scope, and the wind was gusting unpredictably. She took her time studying the conditions, waiting for the perfect moment. When she finally fired, there was a collective holding of breath from the crowd. Through her scope, Sarah saw the bullet strike just slightly off-center. Her heart sank, thinking she had failed. But the instructor raised the green flag, indicating the shot was still within the perfect zone, though barely. Chief Harrison stepped forward and approached Rodriguez. "Mind if I take a look at that last target?" he asked. The two men walked down range together to examine the shot. When they returned, Harrison was shaking his head with what appeared to be admiration. "That's the closest I've ever seen to the edge while still counting as perfect," he said loud enough for Sarah to hear. Most people would have been out on that shot. The 11th and 12th shots were at 650 and 700 yards respectively, both in challenging wind conditions. Sarah was now in a zone where everything else faded away. The crowd, the pressure, even her own doubt seemed to disappear. There was only her, the rifle, and the target. Both shots found their mark perfectly. Shot 13 was the psychological killer. At 750 yards, it was the second longest shot of the challenge, and historically, this was where most attempts failed. The target was barely visible even through high-powered scopes, and the slightest error in calculation or execution would end the challenge. Sarah had been on the range for over 2 hours now, and fatigue was beginning to set in. Her muscles ached from maintaining shooting positions, and her eyes were strained from hours of intense focus through the scope. But she had come too far to let physical discomfort stop her. She took extra time preparing for this shot, rechecking her rifle's zero, studying the wind conditions from multiple angles, and calculating the bullet drop over the extended distance. When she finally settled into position, the entire range fell silent. The shot seemed to echo longer than the others. Sarah held her breath as she looked through the scope. Perfect center mass. 13 down. 2 shots remained, and both would be at the maximum distance of 800 yards. Sarah stood up slowly, her legs shaking slightly from tension and adrenaline. She looked around at the crowd that had gathered. There had to be over 100 people watching now, including several high-ranking officers who had heard about the attempt and come to witness it firsthand. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson approached her during the brief break before the final 2 shots. "How are you feeling, Martinez?" he asked quietly. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, sir," Sarah replied, surprising herself with how calm she felt, despite everything that was at stake. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates played with dolls, she was in the backyard with her father, learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts. Her father, a former Marine, noticed something special about his daughter when she was just 8 years old. She had steady hands, sharp eyes, and most importantly, the mental focus that separated good shooters from great ones. Growing up, Sarah excelled at everything she touched. She was the star of her high school track team, graduated as valedictorian, and earned a full scholarship to study mechanical engineering. But despite all her achievements, she had one burning dream that consumed her thoughts day and night. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL. The problem was simple, but seemingly impossible to overcome. In 2018, women were not allowed in Navy SEAL training. The elite military unit had been exclusively male since its creation, and the Pentagon showed no signs of changing this policy anytime soon. Sarah knew this, but she refused to accept it as the final answer. After college, Sarah enlisted in the Sakudai Navy and quickly proved herself as an exceptional sailor. She volunteered for every difficult assignment, trained harder than anyone else, and consistently scored at the top of her class in every program. Her superiors noticed her dedication, but when she formally requested to attend SEAL training, the answer was always the same. Not possible. Policy doesn't allow it. The rejection letters piled up on her desk. Each one felt like a personal insult, not just to her, but to her capabilities and dreams. Sarah's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Thompson, was a fair man who recognized talent when he saw it. He had watched Sarah outperform many of his male sailors in physical fitness tests, tactical exercises, and weapons training. It frustrated him to see such potential being wasted because of outdated policies. One afternoon, Thompson called Sarah into his office. Martinez, I've been thinking about your situation, he said, leaning back in his chair. The official channels aren't working for you, and frankly, they might never work. But I have an idea that might get some attention from the right people. Sarah sat up straight, her heart racing with hope. Thompson continued, There's an informal marksmanship competition happening next month at the Quantico Marine Base. It's not officially sanctioned by any particular branch, but word gets around. Some very important people attend these events. If you could make a statement there, show them what you're capable of, it might change some minds. The competition Thompson was referring to was legendary among military circles. It brought together the best shooters from all branches of the armed forces. Navy SEALs, Marine snipers, Army Rangers, and other elite operators would gather to test their skills against each other. The event was invitation only, and getting in required either high-level connections or an exceptional reputation. Sarah's eyes lit up with determination. What would I need to do to get invited? She asked. Thompson smiled. That's where it gets interesting. The competition has a unique rule. Anyone can earn an invitation by completing what they call the perfect challenge. It's simple in concept but nearly impossible in execution. You need to make 15 consecutive perfect shots at various distances and conditions, all witnessed by certified military instructors. The challenge had been attempted by hundreds of shooters over the years. Only 12 people had ever completed it successfully, and all of them had gone on to become legends in their respective units. The distances varied from 100 yards to 800 yards, with different weather conditions, lighting situations, and target sizes. The margin for error was 0. A single shot even slightly off-center would mean starting over from the beginning. Sarah felt a rush of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to prove that she belonged among the elite. When can I attempt the challenge? She asked. Thompson checked his calendar. I can arrange for the testing to happen this weekend at our rifle range. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about making good shots. The pressure will be intense. You'll have observers, other shooters will probably show up to watch, and word will spread quickly if you fail. Are you sure you're ready for this? Sarah didn't hesitate. I've been ready for this my entire life, sir. That evening, Sarah called her father to tell him about the opportunity. Her father listened quietly as she explained the challenge and what it could mean for her future. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mija, her father finally said, using the Spanish term of endearment he'd called her since childhood. I remember when you were 10 years old, you told me you wanted to be the best at something important. I asked you what that something was, and you said you didn't know yet, but you'd know it when you found it. Sounds like you found it. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Sarah spent every free moment at the shooting range, working on her breathing techniques, studying wind patterns, and visualizing each shot. She practiced in different lighting, conditions during different times of day, and even in light rain to prepare for any possible weather during the actual challenge. Her fellow sailors began to take notice. Word spread quickly through the base that Martinez was attempting the perfect challenge. Some were supportive, others were skeptical, and a few were openly dismissive. Sarah heard the whispers in the mess. Holland saw the doubting looks, but she used them as fuel for her determination. The night before the challenge, Sarah barely slept. She ran through each shot in her mind, calculating distances, accounting for wind, and preparing for every possible scenario. She knew that in less than 24 hours, she would either take a giant step toward her dream or face another crushing disappointment. As dawn broke on the day of the challenge, Sarah stood at her window looking out at the rifle range. The morning was clear and still, perfect conditions for shooting. She whispered a small prayer, grabbed her gear, and headed out to face the test that would determine her future. The 14th shot loomed before Sarah like a mountain peak that seemed impossible to climb. At 800 yards, the target appeared as nothing more than a small dot through her scope, barely distinguishable from the background. The wind had picked up considerably, creating complex air currents that would affect the bullet's path in unpredictable ways. Sarah took her time studying the conditions. She watched the grass at various distances, observed the movement of flags, and even noted how dust was blowing across the range. Every environmental factor had to be considered and calculated into her shot. At this distance, a tiny miscalculation would send her bullet several inches off target. The crowd had grown silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Even the most skeptical observers were beginning to realize they might be witnessing something extraordinary. Chief Harrison had moved closer to the shooting line, his experienced eyes studying Sarah's every movement with professional interest. Sarah settled into her prone position for what she knew would be one of the most important shots of her life. The rifle felt solid and familiar against her shoulder, but at 800 yards, even the slightest tremor in her hands would be magnified exponentially by the time the bullet reached the target. She controlled her breathing, falling into the rhythm that had been drilled into her since childhood. In through the nose, hold out through the mouth. Her heart rate slowed, and the world around her seemed to fade away until there was nothing but her, the rifle, and that distant target. The wind seemed to calm for just a moment, creating a brief window of opportunity. Sarah had learned to recognize these moments, those precious few seconds when all the variables aligned. She squeezed the trigger slowly, steadily, following through completely as the rifle bucked against her shoulder. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the range, followed by an intense silence as everyone waited to see the result. Sarah kept her eye pressed to the scope, watching as the instructor downrange raised his binoculars to examine the target. After what felt like an eternity, the green flag went up. Perfect center mass. A collective exhale seemed to come from the entire crowd. 14 down, 1 shot remaining. Sarah stood up slowly, her legs shaking from the combination of adrenaline and the physical demands of maintaining shooting positions for hours. She was so close to achieving something that had seemed impossible just a few hours earlier, but she also knew that the final shot was often the most difficult, not because of the physical challenge, but because of the mental pressure. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson approached her again. "Sarah, you need to know that whatever happens with this last shot, you've already accomplished something remarkable. 14 perfect shots in a row is extraordinary by any standard." Sarah nodded her appreciation, but kept her focus on the task ahead. The 15th and final shot was at 800 yards again, but with an additional challenge. She would have to fire from a supported standing position, which was significantly more difficult than prone shooting. The position simulated the kind of quick, unsupported shots that special operations forces might need to make in combat situations. Chief Harrison surprised everyone by approaching Sarah directly. "Martinez, mind if I offer you some advice?" he asked. Sarah looked up at the legendary SEAL, hardly believing he was speaking to her. "Of course, Chief. That last shot, it's not about the target anymore. You've already proven you can hit it. It's about trusting yourself and not letting the moment become bigger than it is. You've made this shot thousands of times in training. This is just one more." Sarah felt a wave of calm wash over her. Harrison was right. She had made similar shots, countless times. The only difference now was the audience and the stakes, but the fundamentals remained the same. She approached the shooting line for the final time, carrying her rifle with steady hands. The wind conditions were challenging but manageable. The afternoon sun was at an angle that created some glare, but nothing she hadn't dealt with before. As she set up for the shot, Sarah became aware of how quiet the range had become. Over 100 people were watching, but she could hear almost nothing except the wind and her own heartbeat. She realized that this moment would define not just her own future, but potentially change perceptions about what women were capable of in military service. Sarah raised her rifle to the supported standing position, using a vertical post as a rest. Through her scope, the target seemed impossibly small and distant. At 800 yards in a standing position, she was attempting something that would be considered extremely difficult, even for the most experienced military snipers. She settled into her shooting stance, distributing her weight evenly, creating the most stable platform possible. Her breathing slowed as she found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths where the body is most still. The crosshairs in her scope aligned perfectly with the center of the distant target. Sarah made her final calculations for wind and distance, then began her trigger squeeze. Slowly, steadily, with no jerking or rushing, just the smooth pressure that had been drilled into her through years of training. The rifle fired, and for a split second, time seemed suspended. The bullet traveled through the air at nearly 3,000 feet per second, but to Sarah and everyone watching, it felt like an eternity. Through her scope, Sarah watched as the instructor downrange raised his binoculars to examine the target. The silence stretched on as he took his time confirming the shot placement. Sarah's heart pounded as she waited for the verdict that would determine her fate. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the instructor raised not just the green flag, but both arms in the air, signaling not just a perfect shot, but an exceptional one. The range erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah had done it. 15 perfect shots in a row, completing one of the most difficult marksmanship challenges in military history. She had earned her invitation to the Quantico competition, and more importantly, had proven that her skills were equal to anyone's. Regardless of gender, Chief Harrison was the first to reach her, extending his hand in congratulation. "Outstanding shooting, Martinez. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen anyone handle that kind of pressure better." Lieutenant Colonel Thompson approached with a huge grin on his face. "Sarah, I think it's safe to say you're going to Quantico, and I suspect this is just the beginning of something much bigger." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah stood holding her father's rifle, looking out at the targets that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. She had taken the first major step toward her dream of becoming a Navy SEAL, but she knew the real challenges were still ahead of her. That evening, she called her father to tell him about the day's events. When she finished recounting every shot, there was pride evident in his voice. "Mia, your grandmother always said that sometimes the impossible is just the untried. Today you proved her right." 3 weeks after completing the perfect challenge, Sarah found herself driving through the gates of Marine Corps Base Quantico in Virginia. The invitation had arrived just 5 days after her shooting demonstration, written on official letterhead, and signed by someone whose name carried significant weight in military circles. The competition was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. As she arrived at the designated area, she saw some of the most elite military units in the world setting up their equipment. Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon, Army Delta Force, Air Force Pararescue, and other special operations forces were all represented. The atmosphere was intense but respectful, with each competitor focused on their preparations. Sarah quickly realized she was not only the only woman competing, but also one of the few participants who wasn't already part of an elite unit. Most of the other competitors had years of special operations experience under their belts. She felt the weight of their curious glances and heard whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. The competition format was different from what she had expected. Rather than individual marksmanship tests, the event was designed as a series of realistic combat scenarios where shooting was just one component of each challenge. Competitors would be tested on their ability to navigate obstacles, solve tactical problems, and make precise shots under extreme stress and time pressure. Chief Harrison, who she learned was one of the event organizers, addressed all the competitors. During the opening briefing, "Ladies and gentlemen, this competition is designed to test not just your shooting skills, but your ability to perform under conditions that simulate what our forces face in real combat situations. Each scenario will push you to your limits and beyond." The first challenge was called Urban Maze. Competitors had to navigate through a mock city environment, engaging targets at various distances while avoiding civilian cutouts. The catch was that they had to carry a 50-pound pack throughout the course and complete it within a strict time limit. Missing a target or hitting a civilian resulted in time penalties that could eliminate a competitor from advancement. Sarah watched the first few competitors attempt the course. Some of the most experienced operators struggled with the physical demands combined with the precision shooting required. When her turn came, she drew on her engineering background to quickly analyze the most efficient path through the maze. She moved through the course with calculated speed, engaging each target, with one shot while maintaining her pace. Her smaller frame actually worked to her advantage in some of the tighter spaces, and her conditioning from years of training paid off as she maintained accuracy even while carrying the heavy pack. When she crossed the finish line, the timer showed she had not only completed the course faster than any previous competitor, but had also achieved perfect accuracy on all targets. The other competitors began to take serious notice of the young sailor, who was outperforming some of the military's best operators. The second challenge was called Sniper's Paradox. Competitors were given intelligence about enemy positions and had to identify and engage multiple targets at long range while under simulated fire. The twist was that some of the targets were actually hostages, requiring competitors to make split-second decisions about what to engage and what to avoid. This challenge played directly to Sarah's strengths. Her engineering mind excelled at quickly processing complex information and making calculated decisions under pressure. She methodically worked through each target, engaging threats while protecting innocent bystanders. Her long-range shooting skills, honed through years of practice, allowed her to make precise shots that other competitors struggled with. After the second day of competition, Sarah was tied for first place with Master Chief Petty Officer David Ice Coleman, a Navy SEAL with over 15 years of special operations experience. Coleman was a legend in SEAL circles, known for his cool demeanor under pressure and exceptional tactical skills. That evening, as competitors gathered for dinner, Coleman approached Sarah's table. "Martinez, right? Mind if I sit down?" Sarah was surprised by the gesture. Coleman was exactly the kind of elite operator she hoped to serve alongside someday. "Of course, Master Chief." Coleman settled into his chair and studied Sarah with professional interest. "I've been watching your performance these past 2 days. Very impressive. Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My father started teaching me when I was 8, Sarah replied. "He's a former Marine. Said shooting was like engineering, all about understanding the variables and making precise calculations." Coleman nodded approvingly. "Smart man, but shooting is only part of what makes a good operator. The real question is whether you can keep that same composure when people are actually shooting back at you." The third challenge would test exactly that. Called fire-based defense, competitors were placed in a simulated forward operating base under attack. They had to coordinate with a team of actors playing other military personnel, direct defensive fire, and make critical shots to protect their position. The scenario included explosions, simulated enemy fire, and the chaos of a real combat situation. Sarah had never experienced anything close to real combat, and she knew this would be her greatest test. As the simulation began, the noise and confusion were overwhelming. Explosions went off nearby, creating smoke and dust that obscured vision. Actors playing wounded soldiers called for help while simulated enemy fire snapped over their heads. But instead of panicking, Sarah found herself becoming calmer as the situation intensified. She methodically identified threats, prioritized targets, and began engaging enemy positions. Her engineering background helped her quickly understand the tactical situation and make decisions about where to focus her attention. When an actor playing a wounded soldier was pinned down by enemy fire, Sarah made a series of precise shots that eliminated the threat and allowed a rescue. When enemy forces attempted to breach their perimeter, she directed defensive fire while making critical shots that stopped the advance. By the time the simulation ended, Sarah had not only survived the chaotic scenario but had played a crucial role in the successful defense of the position. The evaluators were impressed not just with her shooting, but with her ability to think tactically under extreme pressure. The fourth and fifth challenges tested different aspects of special operations skills. Maritime insertion required competitors to swim to shore in full gear and then engage targets from wet, sandy positions. High altitude took place on a mock mountain environment where competitors had to account for altitude effects on ballistics while dealing with cold weather and thin air. Sarah's athletic background and dedication to physical fitness served her well in these challenges. While some larger competitors struggled with the swimming portion, her efficient stroke and conditioning allowed her to complete the water insertion with energy to spare. In the high-altitude challenge, her careful attention to environmental factors and ballistics calculations gave her an advantage over competitors who relied more on instinct than calculation. After 5 days of grueling competition, the final challenge was announced: Impossible Shot. Each of the final 5 competitors would be given one opportunity to make a shot that pushed the absolute limits of what was considered possible with military weapons and ammunition. The shot was at 200 yards, well beyond the effective range. of most military rifles. The target was smaller than standard, positioned in a location that required accounting for multiple environmental factors, including crosswinds, elevation changes, and temperature variations. Most military experts would consider such a shot more luck than skill, but that was exactly the point. Sometimes special operations forces needed to attempt the impossible. Sarah studied the conditions carefully, making calculations that drew on everything she had learned about ballistics, environmental factors, and rifle performance. She made adjustments to her scope that seemed almost intuitive, based on thousands of hours of practice and an intimate understanding of how bullets behaved in flight. When her turn came, she settled into position with complete confidence. The crowd of competitors and officials fell silent as she prepared for the shot. Through her scope, the target was barely visible, a small dot against the distant hillside. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and began her trigger squeeze. The shot felt perfect as it left the barrel, and she had a strong intuition that it would find its mark. The wait for confirmation seemed eternal, but when the spotter's voice crackled over the radio confirming a direct hit, the range erupted in amazement and applause. The aftermath of Sarah's impossible shot created a buzz that rippled through military circles far beyond the competition. Word of her performance spread quickly, reaching the highest levels of Navy leadership and Special Operations Command. For the first time in her military career, Sarah found herself at the center of attention from people who had the power to change policies. Admiral Rebecca Stone, the Navy's first female four-star admiral, requested a meeting with Sarah just 3 days after the competition ended. The meeting took place at the Pentagon, in an office that overlooked the Potomac River. Sarah had never been inside the Pentagon before, and the weight of history in the building was almost overwhelming. Admiral Stone was a formidable woman who had broken numerous barriers during her own naval career. She had commanded ships, led task forces, and navigated the complex politics of military advancement as one of the few women in senior leadership positions. When she looked at Sarah, she saw something of her younger self, but with capabilities that even exceeded her own. "Martinez, I've been following your career with great interest," Admiral Stone began, settling behind her desk. "Your performance at Quantico has created quite a stir. I've had calls from SEAL commanders, Marine generals, and even congressional staffers asking about you." Sarah sat at attention, still hardly believing she was having this conversation. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored by the attention, but I just want the opportunity to serve at the highest level." Admiral Stone smiled. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. The official policy regarding women in SEAL training hasn't changed, but policies can evolve when the right circumstances present themselves." The Admiral pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. "I've been working on something for the past 6 months, even before I knew about you specifically. It's a pilot program proposal called Special Operations Integration Initiative. The idea is to identify exceptional personnel, regardless of gender, and put them through modified special operations training to evaluate their potential." Sarah's heart raced as she listened. This sounded like exactly the opportunity she had been hoping for, even if it wasn't the traditional path to SEAL training. Admiral Stone continued, "The program would be highly classified, with only a select few participants and observers. If successful, it could pave the way for broader policy changes. If unsuccessful, it would be quietly discontinued with no harm to anyone's career." "What would be required of me?" Sarah asked. "Everything, Admiral," Stone replied seriously. "This wouldn't be easier than regular SEAL training, it would be harder. You'd be under intense scrutiny, with some people hoping you succeed and others expecting you to fail. The physical and mental demands would be extreme, and there would be no special accommodations made for gender." Sarah didn't hesitate. "When do I start?" Admiral Stone smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that, but before we move forward, there's someone I want you to meet." She pressed a button on her phone, and within moments, Chief Harrison entered the office. Sarah was surprised to see the SEAL operator, who had been at both her perfect challenge attempt and the Quantico competition. "Chief Harrison has been instrumental in developing the training protocol for this pilot program. Admiral Stone explained. "He'll be your primary instructor and evaluator throughout the process." Harrison nodded to Sarah with professional respect. "Martinez, I've seen enough of your capabilities to know you have the potential to succeed. But I want to be clear about what you're signing up for. This training will push you beyond anything you've experienced. We'll test not just your physical and mental limits, but your character under extreme stress." Over the next hour, Admiral Stone and Chief Harrison outlined the program in detail. Sarah would undergo 6 months of intensive training that would cover all aspects of special operations work: advanced marksmanship, underwater operations, small unit tactics, survival training, and psychological conditioning. The training would take place at a classified facility with other carefully selected personnel. Most importantly, if she successfully completed the program, she would be assigned to a special operations unit on a trial basis, effectively becoming the first woman to serve in that capacity. Her performance in that assignment would determine whether the program would be expanded or discontinued. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at a remote training facility in the mountains of Colorado. The location was so classified that even her father didn't know exactly where she was, only that she was participating in advanced training that could determine her future in the Navy. The other participants in the pilot program were exceptional individuals from various military branches. There were 2 other sailors, 1 Marine, 1 Army Ranger, and surprisingly 1 Air Force pararescue specialist. All had been selected based on exceptional performance in their respective specialties and had volunteered for the unknown challenges ahead. Chief Harrison introduced them to their training team, which included instructors from every special operations community in the military. The message was clear. This training would incorporate the best practices from all elite units, creating a comprehensive program that would test every aspect of special operations capabilities. The first month focused on physical conditioning and basic special operations skills. Sarah found herself pushed beyond limits she didn't know she had. Dawn to dusk training sessions included running obstacle courses while carrying heavy packs, swimming long distances in full gear, and completing complex shooting exercises under extreme fatigue. What surprised Sarah most was how her engineering background gave her unexpected advantages. When the instructors presented complex tactical problems, her analytical mind excelled at finding creative solutions. During navigation exercises, her mathematical skills helped her plot courses and calculate distances with exceptional accuracy. The second month introduced combat diving and underwater operations. This was completely new territory for Sarah, requiring her to overcome natural fears and learn skills that seemed alien to someone who had spent her military career on land. The training was dangerous, with multiple safety divers present during every exercise, but Sarah attacked each challenge with determination. During one particularly difficult exercise, Sarah had to navigate underwater through a mock ship hull, plant simulated explosives, and return to the surface without being detected by role-playing enemy forces. The exercise required exceptional breath control, precise navigation in zero visibility conditions, and the mental toughness to remain calm in an environment where panic could be fatal. Sarah completed the exercise flawlessly, emerging from the water exactly where she was supposed to be and within the prescribed time limit. Chief Harrison, who had been observing from the surface, nodded his approval. The third month focused on advanced marksmanship, and